street. John's Eve, 904. Tell me the story of the princess Mama, begged Edra, holding up her hand to Osrith. She smiled down to the child, who was lying, eyes lighted up, mind filled with sounds of the far-off festivities. Osrith eased herself onto the silk coverlet as the flame-colored hair of her adopted daughter spilled out onto the pillow, and she stroked Edra's temples with the backs of her fingers, a trick which soothed the girl. There was once a princess, she began. I love this story. Edra opened her bright blue eyes and looked at her mother. I know, beautiful, Osrith sighed, trying to keep her voice low. And she lived in a castle by a wild sea. Soon, the rhythm of the story began its soporific result, yet Edra was resisting sleep. The hero of the story, the priest, guarded the crypt in which the bones of all the saints of the realm lay. His was a studious job, yet he was as brave as any warrior, held a sword like any warrior and fought. Vicious pirates often came to raid, but could not breach the walls of the fortress, and the Norse asked a tiny voice. Danes, Osrith confirmed, withdrawing her hand. Maybe her touch was disturbing Edra. What are Danes? Like the Norse? Osrith sighed, listening to the distant shouts and laughter of people enjoying themselves far away. The heathen would be there, allowed be the, plying her knowledge, good knowledge, which worked, but was against the law. Osrith looked across to Edra, whose eyes were determinedly open. Sit up, my darling, Osrith said, moving her pillow up the polished oak bed frame. Nothing had ever been too good for Edra, in Constantine's eyes, and now Mary had died. He took little interest in his children, besides Selak and Indalf, and Domhnall's eldest, Malcolm, all fighting-age boys. You are a Dane, Osrith told her, hesitatingly. Your grandfather ruled vast areas of land which once belonged to my family. He was a great warrior. Osrith paused, considering her choice of words. He was just and true. He took pity on the weak and was fair-minded. Your mother was his only daughter, and I am your only daughter, Edra pressed, her cornflower blue eyes twinkling at Osrith. You have often said it. I have often said it to Constantine, Osrith thought, in Gaelish, as he reminds me of my requirement of espionage for your keep. And you understand me, as well as the Anglish I speak to you, and the Cymric if the servants and the Danish the two slaves speak to you, though they are Norse, and it is the same tongue. You truly are a wonder. I am your mother, yes, Osrith nodded. But the lady who carried you, in her body as you grew, was a brave fierce Danish lady with hair the color of fire. Like mine. She held out her hair in her fingers. And Constantine is my father, he said so. And then Edra threw herself at Osrith fiercely, as if she never wanted to let her go, before pulling her down next to her and demanding the story of the cousins' war. Ecgfrith the Angle and Bridi the Pictor Dunnichten, saying that oft-repeated epithet that, no Angle or Saxon will ever take Alba, will they, Mama? It was too soon for her to understand, Osrith told herself, as Edra settled, finally, into a slow, rhythmical sighing. She was too young to know. But time had passed too quickly. She should write to Bukka. The last she heard of his whereabouts, the elderly priest, Edra's father, had been ministering in Wessex and travelling from parish to parish following Alfred's death and Elswith's expulsion of him from the palace. She did not want the husband of a Dane, even the good and true man Bukka was, to be in any way involved in decisions. No, Osrith knew, from a letter Bukka had written to a monk he knew at Culdis, Ethelelm had taken his place. Ethelelm, whose daughter had usurped Edward's first wife, for the interest of the money he could bring to Wessex's crown. And despite all of that, Osrith had gleaned, from Bukka's missive, not one phrase, not one sentence spoke of anger or resentment, just pity and regret for the future of Wessex, whose political decisions were now being made not by wisdom, but money. He should be made into a saint, Osrith thought. He didn't make rain stop, or start, or bring an abbess back to life, or repel a wind or anything that makes men saints. But then, he never was truly in the favor of Alfred, especially after her brother appeared in Wessex. Deeds, however minor, needed to be recorded, But what of a priest who had calmed a mad Danish woman, out of her wits for the abuse she had suffered at the hands of other Danes? What of the peace he had bestowed on Alfred's greatest warrior? What of the good he had done, every day, inch by inch, second by second? Saint Birger, the man who knew the little things mattered to the lives of ordinary people. He had been like a father to her, as Edra, and to Uhtred she had often heard him say so to Finan, when they thought they were alone. She should write back to Birger, Osrith thought, as she held Edra, his daughter, in her arms. But what to tell him when he did not know his daughter lived? Nearly 5 years old as she was, and every month, every year, it was more and more difficult to know what to say. She should travel with Edra, she should show him his daughter, her life born from Thyra's death. But Osrith was afraid she was a coward. Telling Birger she lived with Constantine in Alba caring for his daughter, it would take a day, if not less, for Uhtred to find out. And she did not want Uhtred to know her, for, by now, after her foolish telling of it to Finan, he was bound to know. August 904. The opportunity came when August brought victory to Constantine. He had refused her to fight with the army against the Norse at Stratcaran, though she accompanied him, with Edra. The battle was bitter, and many Picts and Gaels fell to the Norse. However, many more Norse fell, as did their leader Ivar Ivarsson, causing the Norse to leave Alba. But, Osrith's fears came true, despite her wishing that the facts did not speak for themselves. Uhtred bargained for land with Constantine, who travelled down to the Roman wall, deep into Northumbria. Taking Selark as an agreed hostage again, the prince would be fed and educated as long as Constantine did not make war to reclaim Northumbria to the wall. Uhtred then sided with Ivarsson, and had to retreat. Osrith had feared for Selark, but Constantine told Osrith he was safe. While Uhtred plotted to reclaim Ecgfrith's lost lands to Dunedin, Constantine also had land ambitions, and if he could expand Pitland to beyond the Roman wall then he would so. Domnall, who had also fought the battle at Stratcaran next to his cousin, had also told her of Doncharda's treachery against Flansinna, who had sacked Kells as part of an agreement with the Allied. 15 years after leaving Irian, this was the first time Osrith had seen him look pained for his homeland. She liked Domnall, and Osrith often told herself that she could have married him and been an exiled princess, despite their disastrous start. Had she had done so in Doia, Osrith knew, Domnall and Constantine would still have found out about the ransom her uncle offered in any case. Osrith always checked herself by this and knew Domnall would have annulled their marriage and handed her over to Elfric, Orkjutan, which is why she had run. Domnall was another prince who had never forgiven her for leaving so suddenly. Yet, he had taken her in his arms and had refused to leave her bedside on the day of the eclipse. Not until she had awoken and Muir had assessed her abuse at the hands of the Allied, and her drowning under the dying sun. He had insisted on royal quarters for her, and when Flann had refused, had her taken to his own before petitioning both Domnall and Doncharda to claim apology from King Sign !L for the wrong his sons had done her and dissolve the betrothal of Gormlith to his younger son. If anyone embodied the Christian virtues of humility and justice it was Domnall MacDuan copyright ill. Doncharda tried to tell Flann of the Allied. He told Osrith sadly one night. But his father would have none of it. He trusted Sign !L Mackenchopper too much, and the Northern Yuani all knew how it would end. Even Doncharda in the end. At least Gormlith is happy now. Gormlith, Domnall smiled, passing over a stone beaker of Uistbeatha. The spirit warmed Osrith's chest, and she closed her eyes momentarily in the warmth of the room. Married to Neil Glunjub now, he mused. Little Neil, Domnall's young brother, now 29, with the implacable fairness of his line. Gormlith, sorry and maltreated princess, was now his wife, having been abandoned by not only the younger Allied prince, who had himself eventually been sold into slavery for the shame of taking a mistress by 9 fingers, his brother, a mistress set up by the UNA copyright ill, but also returned to Flansinna having been barren in her marriage to the King of Munster. Osrith often wondered how the little boys had grown up in their palace at Dóir after she's left, and wondered, at a fancy, whether Cormolith, older than her third husband by nearly 10 years, spent her time washing the mud put of the knees of his breeches. We may not have liked it, but Flann and Sinul's starvation war worked, Domhnall continued. The Norse could not fight back, few new Norse would settle in Hoslile land, and now, with Constantine's success, they will not stop in Alba. Wessex, Osrith answered Domhnall's next question before he asked it, or the west coast of Northumberland, Cumbraland, or Mercia. Canute will welcome them in York as exiles. Then there will be war in England soon, Domhnall said. I will coordinate Constantine's fleet, or army, whichever he chooses. And, before that war, Osrith decided, she must take Edra to see her father. 88,888,888. September 904. You don't like the water? There was concern on Edra's tiny features. Osrith turned away from the glass-like strait between Dunnottar and Culdees. I like it well enough, she replied, trying not to catch Sainid's eye. A month after her first conversation with Edra and was now heading out of the Blackwater Dee and into the North Sea, they would be passing Lindisfarne and Bibbenberg, at a distance far enough away that her uncle's army would not intercept them and demand a fee. But, there was a lot of water between Lindisfarne and Sent, around which they must sail to get to Hampton, then up towards Winchester, and plenty of opportunity for attack by anyone. And Osrith was not about to admit to anyone, not least Edra, that water, river, sea or lake, was the only thing that made her feel helpless and cowardly. What did the West Saxons know of us? Constantine had asked her, the night before she left. It was clear from his demeanor, from his expression, the tone of his voice, that he feared she would not return. To be sure, he had taken all but the barest amount of silver from her and had told her Sinad would guard them. Sainid was also under orders to bring them back, Osrith was certain, but she had no intention of staying in Wessex, not least with Edward Rex on the throne. They know little, very few knew of me. I could have been safe in Wessex for longer, for much longer. Had I not made the mistake of telling Uthod's best friend that I was his sister, Osrith added, silently. Yet, you fled, with Edra, to me? Constantine reminded her, grimly. In the throne room that evening, he was not sitting, but looking out of the window, at the late summer sun on the Dee, refusing to meet Osrith's eye. To here, the only place I could consider my home. Wessex is not home, and few in the Saxon kingdoms consider you at all. Constantine turned, looking impassive. That will be their mistake. One day, when the Cymric, the Britons, remember it was the Say who invaded, long before the Norse and Danes. For now, we must contain the Norse beyond the wall, to prevent their incursions, prevent their return. Constantine turned away. Do you miss Domhnall? Osrith asked suddenly. Yes, Constantine replied, we were the same, alone, exiled. Like Domhnall, Domhnall made some bitter choices to regain the throne again. You were there. Giric. Constantine returned. Osrith, why did you return if you were going to go back? His eyes were full of hurt, and for once he did not try to force himself on her for comfort. Why had she? Alfred had died. Yes. Thyra had run, and she had followed. She had been so close before, when she had been with Uhtred carrying out a foray into Pitland. Because I do not believe you will sell me to Elfric now, Osrith replied. I am no longer worth anything to him. And, because she missed the north, she could stand no longer in a place of ritual, so far removed from Cuthbert's faith, so driven on schedule that there was no place for an individual to directly challenge themselves on God's might. Her choice had come when Osrith had been her choice. Remove yet another germ from her body. No, not a germ. This was a child, and she had screamed to the air when the Cymric healer had pulled out the unwanted life. This time, she had grown gravely ill. She had lost a deal of blood. Finan had nursed her through, dear Finan, who knew why she suffered, what she had done, and could not wholly trust it was not his own. She had failed to return to Edward's side, and broken her oath as his warrior. Although, now Edward was no longer the Etheling, he was the king, he would have had no more use for her anyway. But, more than that, she had truly known her brother, his divided loyalty, his bravery, the love his men showed him. He had shown he could not serve Alfred on the king's terms, but he did, and felt the king owed him more for his service. He had taken the detestable Ethelfled as his lover, yet sworn to Edward as Rex. The more she knew of Uther, the more she despised him. The brother she had dreamed of all those years ago, standing before Bibbenberg's gates, Sobrit's head clasped in his hand, never had been. He was a myth, a story, he was just a dream. Your will was to be with your brother, Constantine conceded, though Osrath noted now, as salt water from the North Sea whipped her face, he had never denied she had been part of a bargain with Elfric. I have met Uther, I admire him, Constantine had said. I do not. But that was not entirely true. She did respect all he had achieved, but as a person, he was not what a brother would be. She had never felt more at home than in the company of the royal Gales, the house of Aetildilpin. She had stood between Finan and Uther on Constantine's meeting with Ragnar Ragnarsson, south of Dietilda superscript 1 Eden all those years ago, seeing Mary's clever eyes in Selark, who so resembled his father. Would she have run to his side? Would have stood by him if Ragnar had attacked ... if Uther and Finan had attacked? He was, even now as a man, the stubborn, demanding boy she knew. Those characteristics had matured into strategic cunning and forthright leadership, yet she bought Edra's comfortable life, and Constantine never treated her as the servant she had always been to him, a thing to be used at his will. And it had been to him, at the risk of her own life, that she had run for the same reason she had run from Dunnottar and her life in the court of Domhnall. She had been afraid. Not afraid in the same way as she had been when she realized King Domhnall knew her identity, and had been terrified he would trade her back to Elfric. No, this was worse terror. In short, she was ashamed he was her brother, that he had taken up with Ethelfled, had Wessex and Mercian interests when he should have his eye only on Bibbenberg. Once she had admitted she was his sister to Finan, in a moment of weakness, he would undoubtedly have told his Edward who she was to him. She hated him, hated what he was. Not a noble, loyal Saxon lord, to whom she could run, confide, offer loyalty and strength to regain their home that he so badly desired. Instead, his slave life in the house of Ragnar the Fearless, their father's killer, had shaped him into the man, a man whose loyalties were so deeply divided neither Danes nor Saxons could anticipate his loyalties, neither, Osrith suspected, could her brother himself. He had married for love into the kin of Ivar the Boneless, yet this served a purpose of striking at Elfric, their uncle. Yet, his Saxon ties had bound him to Alfred and his family, tighter ever than to Bibbenberg. She had run because she despised the man he was, and did not care whether he lived or died. Any information she had Constantine could have to further his claim to Northumbrian up to the Roman wall, or further into Northumbria, she didn't care. Besides, she was valueless to Elfric now. Osrith Lackland would cut her links suited of Bibbenberg, he was no longer her brother. He was now, with the agreement she had made with Constantine to spy against Wessex, her enemy. And it would begin, when she returned, just south of Strathclyde, it would begin in Cumbraland, with King Guthred. For Constantine had told her so. King Guthred held the key to the lands in the south, and Osrith, she was the lock into which the King of Cumbraland would fit.